First of all, anybody who gives up a successful life in modern commerce, in other words, making money, to study crop circles has really got to be devoted to the subject. Freddie Silva, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Art. How are you?
I'm quite well. Where are you located?
Right now I'm in, I was going to say sunny Portland, Maine, but it's not sunny yet. But it will be by the time we finish with the interview.
All right. Well, I had not looked at the phone number associated with your appearance, and the accent said to me, oh, my gosh, he's in Great Britain or perhaps Australia. I don't discern that carefully. Freddie, why in the world would somebody turn from a successful career making money into a full-time study of something like, fascinating as it is, crop circles?
Well, Art, I think 10 years later, I'm still asking myself the same question, but the fringe benefits have been so wonderful. The things I've experienced, the things I've seen, and of course the people I've met along the way. That the commercial side of it always is a bit of a problem with people doing this kind of research. It's always a struggle every day, every month, but somehow it seems to work. The numbers somehow end up in your favor at some point along the way. But there was something that I saw many years ago when I was actually living in Chicago back in 1990, and I saw this image on television, and it just turned me. I had no idea what it was doing to me, what it was saying. I just knew what I was looking at was something that was of great benefit to humanity, and that was my first involvement with the phenomenon of crop circles. Even though I was watching this thing on television, I had no idea if this was land art or people had sort of gone around with a lawnmower and made this incredible design in the field somewhere. I was actually ironing a shirt at the time with the sound turned off, but I knew exactly what I was looking at when I saw that first picture. And the funny thing is that the more people that I've met on my journey, the more they tell me exactly the same story, that it's happened to them in the same way, as if these messages are unlocking some kind of memory inside of human beings, and it's getting them to wake up and recognize their purpose in life.
I also have had fairly profound feelings when looking at some of the crop circles, and of course I've seen most of them over the years, Freddie. I am curious, what percentage, Freddie, of the crop circles that show up on a yearly basis do you think are genuine? And when I say genuine, of course, I mean not made by man.
It's difficult to say. It sort of brings back the old argument when Colin Andrews came up with that 80-20 theory a few years ago, which caused no end of confusion. It's very difficult to say because you'd have to have been a person who has gone into every single one of them. I'm talking about 11,000 reports in 29 countries, going back just to 1980 at least. Of course, they go back to at least 1682. But you'd have to analyze every single one of them, and this has been a growing phenomenon. It's been a growing education along the way. I have to say, just looking at what I know and what I've experienced, that up to about 1991, I'd say virtually 95% were all genuine. The hoaxing was so rare in those days. You could really tell what was man-made just by the mess that was being made. But I think what happened was, historically, as the crop circles began to grow in popularity, and it almost became a religion by the time we had, the big Barbary Castle tetrahedron, the very famous tetrahedral design.
Of course, yes.
That everybody seems to react to in a very positive way. That's when I think the authorities got very anxious that something out of control was taking place, and that's when the whole concept of Doug and Dave was invented. Because the whole story of Doug and Dave can be traced back to the British Ministry of Defence to some reliable degree, and then something very weird happened around about 92 and 93. When all the media really was agog with all this concept that two guys had made up to that point about 5,000 circles on their own, which just logistically is ludicrous. The phenomenon seems to have retreated for a couple of years, and during 92, 93, most crop circles were definitely man-made by, just pranksters and people out for a good time. And then it had a resurgence in 94. 95, 96 were growing years. 97 was very strong. And then around 99, 2001, we started seeing another ebb. And I'd say, hand on heart, that the last truly major design in Britain was in 2003, and the last 2 years I've seen a lot of nonsense, a lot of construction lines, a lot of mechanical evidence on the ground. So it seems to go up and down. It has an ebb and flow, just like a tide, as if it's actually obeying some kind of natural principle as well. So it is difficult to put a number on it. But
you mentioned Colin Andrews in AT20. What was that?
A few years ago, Colin did a study of all kinds of elements that were taking place inside the crop circles, most notably the magnetic field deviation that seemed to happen inside the genuine ones. And he announced to the world that 80% of the world's crop circles were man-made. Now, all this was taken out of context because what he was trying to say was that during the years 1999 to 2001, of all the crop circles that he had personally analyzed, which could have been anywhere to about 30 to 40% of all of those in England, of all of those analyzed, 80% showed mechanical flattening processes which could be attributed to human beings, whereas the 20% that he'd analyzed actually had showed signs of a natural phenomenon that was guided by some kind of intelligence force. And that was what sort of threw people off. That suddenly they realized that so many were being man-made. But by that time, by around the year 2000, there was a lot of people that were out there with planks, and some of them were using garden rollers. For heaven's sake, it was ridiculous. And but people seem to have forgotten the fact that of those 20%. Represents quite a large, significant number where the forces of nature were being manipulated to an extraordinary degree that were leaving all kinds of interesting effects behind. And
for example, I recall that in what were considered to be genuine crop circles, there was a genetic change? There was a change in the that could only have been matched by, for example, crops that have been put in a microwave oven and exposed to microwave energy. Is that correct?
I mean, my theory actually goes slightly the other way, but it's very similar. What was happening is that the plants in the genuine circles to this day exhibit some kind of cellular change at the microscopic level. The same is happening to the soil, where the crystalline structure of the soil has been altered, and that would require atmospheric pressure of about 5 atmospheres coupled with an intense heat of about 1,500 degrees Celsius. And I looked at microwave originally, which is what Dr. Levengood was looking at for many, many years, but I couldn't understand how microwave could be capable of leaving behind nothing but a lot of damaged plants, because microwave is very damaging. And I began to look at sound in all its many other facets, and I actually discovered that the effects of ultrasound and infrasound, which is a sound above and below the human hearing range, actually generated the exact same effects as microwave, but without all the nasty side effects. And it actually was able to even manipulate the plants at the chromosome level, and even create the kind of charring effect that we see in the genuine plants too.
And what kind of frequency and decibel level of sound would do this?
Above the human hearing range, we're talking about the megahertz range, which are the kind of frequencies that we keep picking up in the genuine circles. Usually anything over 250 megahertz. So it's way, way above our level of an ability to hear. And that's
way above. Way above.
Very, very high, unless you're actually way above even dogs, I think. But at that range, the frequencies start to actually do strange things, and that is that they're actually capable of altering your state of awareness. And, of course, there's been so many hundreds of people that have experienced that in the crop circles to begin with. The other end of the range, which is the infrasound, is below 20 hertz. And at that point, when you attach 5 atmospheric pressure to sound, what happens is that the sound wave traveling through a liquid inside the stem is capable of boiling the water inside the stem in about 1 nanosecond. And
let me stop you and just make absolutely sure of what you've said. You said that one range seems to be in the area of 250 megahertz. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right, that's a radio frequency. That's so far above sound. That's a radio frequency. 20 hertz is extremely low. 20 hertz is not all that far from the Schumann resonance frequency, just down below that, right?
Exactly. And it's a very short wave, but the trick is when you actually couple atmospheric pressure with that wave, that's what creates the heating that takes place inside the stems, which is why in the genuine circles the plants are charred on the outside, and also the liquid's been expelled from the plant. And we can tell that from the little blowholes that appear in the nodes of the plants, where the water literally, when it's actually boiled, just like when you're making a cup of tea.
Yeah, it virtually explodes, right?
Yeah, it expands, and it has to look for the weakest part of the plant, which is the node, and it blows a hole, just like in the film Alien, and the water comes out. And it also accounts for the fact that many of the farmers who see the crop circles at, say, at 5:30 in the morning in their fields, they report steam coming out of them, columns of steam coming out of the circles. And, of course, infrasound at that range actually is able to create an atomization of the water molecule, so it will create steam.
All right. Wouldn't it be true, Freddie, that any biological entity who'd be on the ground in the area of the crop circles, if something like that were used, would also virtually be boiled alive?
They wouldn't. They would have a nice, pleasant headache. Yes, in fact, I went into a crop circle in 2003. Ironically, it was shaped. Actually, no, it's 2002. I beg your pardon. And it was actually shaped like a shell. And I actually found for the first time of hundreds of visits, hundreds upon hundreds of snails on the ground, all boiled alive. I mean, it was almost like a feast. Unfortunately, they weren't good enough to eat. But the only fatality that's ever been associated with a crop circle directly was actually in the Canadian prairie, where a farmer came out one day, saw a crop circle on his land, and he saw the typical swirled pattern floor. And along with the swirled crop, he found a series of very long quills that stretched from outside the perimeter of the flattened area. And it followed the swirl right down to the center. And when he followed the quills, he actually found at the very end of those quills a very flat and very dead and mummified Canadian porcupine, which they're about 30 pounds up in the prairie. They're very, very big creatures. And that, again, testified to the incredible acoustic pressure that was generated at the time that was able to flatten a 30-pound porcupine. And, of course, the whole thing was that the actual ability of infrasound to release the water molecule and nullify it meant that the poor creature had been mummified. I mean, all the water inside its body had been completely expelled, and for weeks and weeks afterwards, the creature did not even emit any odor. So it actually increased the mummification process. So in a way, it kind of died to prove the point that not only was pressure being used in the process, but also there was a huge amount of heating taking place in a very short space of time.
All right, Freddie, let me ask you this. I'm sure you're well aware of the HAARP project ongoing in Alaska, the ionospheric heater. It actually heats the ionosphere, and it's capable of blowing a hole in the ionosphere. Conceivably, the HAARP project, Freddie, is capable of modulation of the kinds of frequencies that you're talking about right now. And, of course, it's a relatively secret project. I mean, there's a very public aspect to it, but we all know that DARPA is involved, and there's a very secret aspect to it. Is it possible, Freddie, that the HAARP project or a project like it is producing these?
I thought about that for many, many years. And, again, like you say, it's very difficult to prove some of these things because they are so secret. So you can only sort of surmise and put one and one together and see where the logic trail leads. And logically thinking, I mean, the military usually tends to do things very quietly and in great secret. And to leave these fingerprints all around the world, and like I said, in 29 countries now, 11,000 of these designs, it doesn't seem very secret. And to me, it would seem highly unlikely that they would be experimenting with something and leaving so much of a trail behind, especially when scientists have been able to figure out that strange things are happening to the plants or the soil and even the watershed with which the energy interacts. So I would tend to favor another source for this, a very non-mechanical source.
Okay. Maybe you can give us all some idea, Freddie, of the percentage of crop circles that have made their appearance in Great Britain and surrounding that rough geographic area as compared to the rest of the world.
It seems to be about a ratio of about 85% in the south of England, typically in the areas bordered by the old kingdom of Wessex, which today is Wiltshire, Hampshire, and parts of Sussex. It's a very, very old area of the world. It's a huge chalk bed. In fact, it's about, I believe it's over 800 feet of chalk. It's the world's deepest chalk aquifer. And ironically enough, the other great percentage of concentration of reported crop circles, about 15%, actually happens over the Canadian prairie, which is a limestone aquifer, which happens to be the chemical twin of chalk. So they seem to favor aquiferous ground for some interesting reason. And the rest are sort of interspersed around the world. There are more reports coming out every year because people have finally begun to figure out who to tell. For example, a few years ago, it was discovered in South Africa. They've been appearing maybe for thousands of years. It's part of local folklore, and they're considered to be imprints and signs of the gods. And when these things appear, it's a great time of festivity. I mean, the local tribes actually fence the designs in the maize, and they actually take 3 days out to honor the gods with with gifts, with food, with festivities, and give them thanks for a wonderful year. So
no, that's absolutely fascinating. I had not heard that this had gone on in Africa and that it had been received in the manner you just described. That really is fascinating. And while the British and some students in Britain might have the time and inclination to do this kind of thing, certainly they do not in Africa. So that's really interesting.
It is, and the way they also tackle it is very interesting. For example, I mean, now I live here in America. Many people are saying, well, why don't we have many more reports here? And I said, well, they're around. We just don't get to hear that much about them, and usually because people don't know who to tell. But then there are those who are very, very frightened by the whole thing because of their particular, ideological belief. And for example, in Indiana, where we had many circles in the past, the first thing that some of the farmers do is basically call the police, and the police will put a crime scene tape around the design. Well, contrast that to these people in Africa who, they basically honor the site as a sacred space, and they don't go in there and they honor it. It's a huge change of perception. And again, it shows that perhaps that there are places in the world where the phenomenon is much more welcome. And it shows, again, that there's a benevolence behind it, that if it feels like it's threatening people, perhaps it backs up a bit and lets people sort of think about it. It lets it sink into the local psyche before making another approach. And for me, it shows that there's a great benevolence attached to it.
Well, I suppose in America it's regarded as a crime against the farmer. In other words, they've destroyed a significant portion of some farmers' crops, right?
Which is understandable, although when you actually look carefully at the plants, if it's a genuine circle, nothing's actually been damaged at all. Very little, let's see, if you actually leave the plants to their own devices in the genuine circles, after a few days, they begin to react back up to the light, and they raise themselves almost like magic. So, again,
really?
There's no damage at all, absolutely. There's no damage has actually occurred to the plants whatsoever.
Even with the exploding seed pods, huh?
Exactly, and it seems to differ. I should qualify that because when the energy interacts with the plants, when the plants are at an early level of maturity, that is when they're still fairly young, yes, there's very, very little damage that occurs, and the plants are able to reconstitute their mobility and raise themselves back up to the light. In fact, they start to outgrow the plants and the rest of the field, which have not been affected by the energy. But when the energy interacts with the plants, where it's at the later stage of development, then yes, because the plants are already very mature and very brittle, then yes, they will. It does actually stunt their growth.
All right, Freddie, hold tight for a moment. We're here at the bottom of the hour. Fascinating stuff. Obviously, not all crop circles are man-made. There's simply no question about it. Some of them are made by, well, maybe that'll be the next question for Freddie. From Manila in the Philippines, I'm Art Bell. There's absolutely no question about it. If you have taken the time and trouble to look at the many, many websites that carry wonderfully detailed photographs of crop circles, many of them, when you look at them, affect you profoundly. I mean, there's simply no question about it. Now, I don't know that I'm able to distinguish in my mind between the man-made and the others, we'll call them the others, that obviously are not man-made, but many of them do have a profound effect on you. They simply, there's no other way. I mean, some of them, 10 acres and larger, obviously not made by man. Question is, made by whom? We will ask. Of course, over the years, I've worked closely with Linda Moten Howe, and this has been one of her prime areas of investigation. Freddie, the two main questions about crop circles are who's making them, and, of course, what do they mean? Let's try the who part. Have you made any progress in your investigation at all with regard to who is doing this?
Very much so. In fact, it was one of the first things that intrigued me, and I came across very, very early on in my work on the transcript of a renowned psychic in England called Isabel Kingston, who has since become a great friend of mine, and I've worked with her closely for many, many years. And I was reading over some of the transcripts, and it gave me a lot of clues as to what was really going on. And just to quickly qualify this person, because obviously, there are good channelers and there are those that are not so good, and there are good lawyers and not so good lawyers. So just to qualify her, she was a banker, so she's someone who obviously used a very analytical mind to make her living. And she developed her abilities to an incredible degree where the police in England, when they're at a miss to find out who committed a certain crime or where a certain body is buried, they actually go and knock on her door, and she has a near 100% record of working with them, and always very, very quietly. She's very self-effacing, no great sense of self-importance, and, like the rest of us, doesn't make that much money either. So she's someone who can be trusted, and having known her for many, many years, being privy to the information that she has revealed and actually having that information proved in front of me, for me, has been a great way to validate the information that she gets. So back in 85, 86, 87, at a time in England when the words crop circle really were not heard. I mean, these things were happening, and it was a local folklore. It was very rare. Farmers had been used to these, what they called devil circles and witches' rings, all the way back into 1890. But it really was a sort of a rare and local phenomenon. And one day, she happened to have been in a channeling session. She was a trance medium, and she accidentally vectored in this information from a universal consciousness that called itself the Watchers, who actually seemed to pop in and out of our history all the way back to the Egyptian times. And back then, they were referred to as the Neter, the creator gods. And they gave her all this information about this emerging phenomenon that would be making its appearance throughout Britain with geometric light structures based on sound. And when she sort of channeled this afterwards and they read the transcripts, the whole group was shaking their heads going, what on earth is this all about? And in the middle of the transcript, they said, well, within 7 days, we will give you a sign of our intent at the foot of your hill of Silbury, which is Europe's tallest man-made conical mound, a very enigmatic pyramid, if you like, in the south of England. So they decided to go at the base of Silbury Hill 7 days later, and lo and behold, those were the first series of what they call the Celtic cross crop circles, which is the central circle with the 4 little circles arranged like a cross. And that's when they realized, oh, that's a crop circle and a geometric light symbol. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I began to read all the transcripts with great interest to find out what this is all about, and began to realize that the information that she was receiving was getting validated more and more. I mean, she was predicting where they were going to appear, what they're going to look like. The timing was always a little bit off. It was always within 24 hours or 48 hours, but the information was getting predicted and also validated one day after the next. And so I began to take a lot more interest in this group consciousness and what they were involved with. fluid, and the purpose to why they were making these shapes. And over the course of the years, I've been able to prove it bit by bit.
Okay, Freddie, again, the question was who, and you keep referring to we as you read the transcript. So who?
Well, like I said, it's a universal consciousness called the Watchers. And I'm sorry if I'm digressing. It's about 2:30 in the morning where I am, so thank you for bringing me back.
Okay, so is the who us? In other words, we are the consciousness, nearly as I can tell, here on Earth. So are you suggesting that this universal or group consciousness, that we are the ones doing this?
We are actually involved at a subconscious level, because what happened was, and again, going back to the transcripts, this universal consciousness was saying that we as a group consciousness, in other words, as a human consciousness, had asked for help. We were worried about the state of the world, and a great number of people, in other words, say 51% of the population of the world, at some point in the 20th century, sent out through our prayers, through our thoughts, we asked for help from the outside to try and figure out that we had lost the plot down here, that we basically were making a mess of the whole earth. We were getting tired of this, this usage of very few people in power who are controlling so many people, and basically creating the situation that we're in today. And this universal consciousness, and some people call it, they call them gods, they call them angels, some people even call them fairies.
Okay.
They basically have been around for millions of years, but essentially they are the core group of beings who are around and whose sole purpose it is to guide humanity through its more critical stages of development.
All right, then if I've heard you correctly, we essentially consciously or subconsciously prayed for help, recognizing the pathetic condition of our Earth currently, and I can certainly attest to that. And we're getting an answer, is what you're telling me. And so, okay, let's say that we are receiving an answer. Then, Freddie, how far have you come in discerning what we're being told?
Basically because a lot of the symbols that began appearing in the early days could actually be deciphered by Aboriginal tribes and ancient tribes, because a lot of those symbols are actually etched into their rock art. It's etched into the memory of the tribe. Right. I mean, there are many symbols that can, you show them to Aborigines, you show them to Navajo, to Hopi, right, and they'll say, oh, this means that. And that's where the first basis of the communication came about. We began to realize that this was an archetypal communication. The second part, and again going back to the transcripts, was that the information based on this that was coming from this group consciousness was veiled. In other words, the reason why they called themselves the Watchers was because they could not actually do anything for us. They could only help us and try and move us along. We would be doing the work ourselves. And so the symbols, they were saying, would work subconsciously. And that's when the geometers down here began to look at the symbols and recognize, well, wait a minute, the positioning of these circles, the positioning of these rings and these designs, there's something unusually harmonic about the designs. And they began to realize that they were absolutely coded with an invisible array of what we call sacred geometry. And that kind of geometry is actually inherent in our own DNA. When you actually take the human DNA molecule apart and look under the microscope at the crystalline structure, it's actually composed of hexagons and pentagrams stuck to each other. Mm-hmm. So all that geometry basically was encoded in these simple symbols, and it was talking to us subconsciously, and it was waking up part of the human psyche that basically had we just shut down for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And that's how I began to put the connection together, that people that went into the circles were saying, I've woken up, something has woken me up from something, and people could not understand it. Just in the same way that you and I have seen pictures on television, Art. And we have.
Freddie, is it necessary to get these conscious or subconscious messages to actually go to a circle, or is the viewing of one on a monitor or something sufficient to get the message across?
From my experience, it seems that as long as you don't actually distort the image, the original photograph, in other words, you don't put it through Photoshop and you squeeze it, as long as the original photograph, the imprint of the information retains itself in the actual image. So you can actually be, in the Philippines, look at a picture, and the information will transfer itself down. It'll download itself into you, and that's why you're having those experiences of memory. You recognize what you're looking at, but you can't quite logically explain it.
That's right. No, I described it as simply some of them have a profound effect on you. There's no question about it.
Exactly.
That's a conscious profound effect. Apparently, there's also a subconscious profound effect. Now, Freddie, you said that the Hopi and others have recognized some of these symbols. Can you do a simple translation for us on any of them?
It's not that quite sort of clear-cut. It's more to do with archetypal messages. I'm trying to think of one. For example, there was one in England which was... it was a sort of a elliptical head which is sort of bent to one side. It had four draping sort of feathers coming out of the central circle, and the actual line that connected the big circle to a smaller circle was also bent. And that was shown to, I believe, the Hopi, and they said that actually means Mother is crying. It's an image of the earth with its four elements on either side of the circle actually drooping, saying that the elements are under stress, and it's a message to us to say that Mother is crying, our Earth Mother is crying for help, and it's up to us to try and resume our responsibility for the Earth and take control of the situation and be more generous and to the planet that we're living in so that we can take better care of it. So that's the kind of information. That's how they actually communicate. It's with archetypal symbols, almost like hieroglyphs. They are what they mean. They're like an encyclopedia of information in each symbol.
All right. That's very, very interesting, and it certainly makes sense to me. But the general public and certainly the media is not going to grasp that kind of subtlety, and that message is not going to be widely heard, Freddie, unless something big changes. In other words, if it remains this subtle, then crop circles are going to remain an interesting enigma that is not going to mean a whole lot to anybody.
And that's part of the frustration as well, even from my end. I would love for everybody to be able to just sort of get the message immediately and wake up and recognize that we're here to do something very, very big and very important in life, make a positive contribution. But as they were saying as well, the watchers were saying that not everybody is in on the same game plan because, I mean, we come down here as souls, trapped in a body, and we come down here to have an experience, and not everybody is having the same experience. I mean, there are some people who come down here to control people. There are some people who come here to create havoc and war, and then there are those who come here to make peace. So, and that's the whole myriad of being human. It comes down to the fact that we have choice, and what they're giving us is the possibility. They're waking us up to a greater possibility, and it's up to us to choose what we're going to do with it. So some people basically take on board the information, and they wake up, and like me, they give up a very good career, and they dedicate themselves to learning and to try to, to tell the truth to the best of their ability.
All right. Freddie, you said that, you said that with regard to the lady who had done the channeling, that she had proven to you, or that it had been proven to you, that what she was channeling was real or was accurate. In what manner was that proven to you, Freddie?
It was the way in which the information was given under trance, and that she was given the location and even the designs and positioning of where these shapes were going to be, only within a matter of days, and then they would manifest in that exact location, and the information was never given to anybody outside a very, very close-knit group of people. I'm talking about a handful of people, and I know for sure that they don't go out and make them. They're very responsible people.
All right. Okay, that does make sense. If she was actually able to call it, unless she was in league with with a group of British students who were going to then run out and quickly create what she had declared would occur, then yeah, that's fairly good proof, I guess. But again, I'm concerned that if these circles are containing this kind of important message for mankind about our own Earth, it's just too subtle. And as you mentioned, I'm sure it's very, very frustrating for you. How do we move it to the next level and get people to understand that these messages, or at least some portion of them, are absolutely real and critical to our survival?
I'll give you another example of the information that she was giving back in '87, and the watchers were saying that within our time, and indeed by the year 2007, so I'm definitely looking forward to next year, that the actual technical information of the symbols would be revealed. People would be given the information, and scientists would actually start revealing the fact that there is technical knowledge hidden inside the crop circles, because each symbol speaks on different levels to different people. And back in 1991, something very interesting was happening in the fields. The crop circles were appearing in twos. In other words, they were appearing. Identical crop circles were appearing literally within a half a mile of each other, within days of each other. And I remember the work of a couple of very interesting people called Myers and Percy, who at the time measured the designs, two in particular, which to all intents and purposes seemed absolutely identical, carbon copies of each other. And to them, when they looked at the actual measurements and the actual schematic drawings of these designs and overlaid them, they found that the designs were not identical. There were small numerical discrepancies between them. And being mathematicians, they began to look at the numbers that were being drawn out of the difference between the two designs. And they found the first series of numbers actually equated to the speed of light, our known speed of light.
Oh, no
but they
kidding.
were left with a whole bunch of numbers left over, and they thought, well, let's apply this by logic and see what these two sets of numbers then mean. And from that, and I'm going to cut a very, very long story short, they were able to extrapolate not one, not two, but three speeds of light. Now, at the time, most orthodox scientists basically laughed at this suggestion until about 3 years ago, I believe. It was revealed in, I think it was Nature magazine, if I'm not mistaken, that science has now finally proved that there are two speeds of light. So the circle makers appear to be well ahead of us, because we extracted this information back in 1992, and we revealed that there was three speeds of light available in the universe. That's just one example. The second example is that the watchers were saying that there is a device, there's an energy machine that's transcribed in these symbols, and this energy machine has something to do with the illusion of time and the ability to transmute magnetism and possibly gravity. So
my gosh, you're moving awfully quickly here. What circle described the machine you're talking about?
The one on the cover of my book, which is the famous Barbary Castle tetrahedron, which is the one that people just seem to gravitate to. And it was the sort of the crowning glory of the year 1991. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's basically a series of radiating circles and rings from a central source, bounded by a triangle or a tetrahedron with three balls at each end. And I know for a fact that one gentleman here in America who's keeping very quiet, and I certainly won't mention his name, he actually contacted me and said that he was able to build a 6-foot, three-dimensional replica of this tetrahedron using the exact angles, the exact dimensions and principles, and he's got it to levitate in his home. So that's how close we are to actually deciphering this information.
My God, have you gone to visit this man?
No, but he sent me enough information to make it sound very, very credible. And the fact that he's actually sounds very frightened, he knows that he's onto something, and he's keeping very quiet. And I also know of people also in Australia who are working with this similar device, and they will reveal this information in their own time. But I am assured that they also have been working with similar principles, and it turns out that they're also working with anti-gravity devices. So it appears that the channeling is bearing true.
Are you telling me that this man has actually achieved levitation using a design from the Barbary Castle circle?
Absolutely. And it's almost 2007.
Yeah, and it's almost 2007. All right, Freddie, hold tight. Over the years, I've interviewed a number of people who've had fascinating things to say about circles, but this may top it. Obviously, we're going to try and pry some information from Freddie about who this man is. And if something like this could be proven, then obviously it would break the whole thing wide open, wouldn't it? Can you imagine that? Levitation from a design derived from the Barbary Castle Circle. From Manila in the Philippines, where the rain falls gently at the moment, I'm Art Bell. My guest is Freddie Silva. He gave up a very lucrative career in modern commerce to begin a lifelong study of crop circles. And what he said so far has been absolutely fascinating in the sense that he says that the real circles, and there are real circles, folks, are sending a message to us that, in effect, we, through our mass consciousness, have sent out a plea, a message to whoever to help us because of the state of our world. An interesting theory, to be sure, and that what we're receiving in the real circles is an answer to that question. And Don in Campbell, California, fast blasts me a really intriguing proposition. He says, "Hey, Art, has anybody ever thought of doing a project to do a man-made crop circle to communicate with whoever it is or whatever it is that's talking to us? In other words, if we can discern what they're saying to us and it really is some sort of warning, then why not, once we have decrypted it to some degree, attempt to answer and establish some kind of communication with whoever it is that's sending these messages to us?" That question to Freddie in a moment. Clearly, we'll get back to the Barbary Castle business in a moment. But, Freddie, I really do want to ask you about... And you know what? Before I do any of that, you're nice enough to be here. Let me plug your book. Book is Secrets in the Fields, The Science and Mysticism of Crop Circles. That's a cool title, Secrets in the Fields, The Science and Mysticism of Crop Circles. Available, I assume, I don't know, Amazon.com, the usual, right?
Well, if you want to support your local author, come to my website. Because then I get at least 50% of royalties if you come to my website, and there's a lovely special offer on there as well. And
oh, no kidding. In other words, you make more money if they come to your website and buy it there.
You'd be surprised how little people make when it goes to a store. Very, very little.
No, Freddie, I would not. I've got a few books under my belt. I'm well aware of how it works, or where it doesn't work, more likely. So if they come to your website, what is the special offer?
Actually, there's a DVD that I'm offering with the book, so you get two for a reduced price, and it gets bundled together as a big package, and it gets sent off to you in a couple of days.
Okay, and your website is?
cropcirclesecrets.org.
cropcirclesecrets.org. All right. Don in Campbell, California, really did come up with what I thought was an excellent one, and that is, if we have to some degree begun to discern, and if the Barbary Castle thing is true, then certainly we have, what these crop circles mean, then what about the idea of, in essence, answering them with a crop circle?
It's a great question. It has been done, and it's had mixed success. The most famous case I can put my finger on, and it was a very, very good exercise because it had employed archaeocryptographers, it employed psychics, it employed field researchers, and so on. There was a group of about, 12 people who got together one day and said, well, why don't we try to locate, through logic and mathematics, a very special place on the Earth's surface, especially in England, where we can actually sit down at a very special place where the harmonics are just right. We will pay the farmer for a small piece of his field, and through our combined intent to communicate, we want to find out if there's a consciousness behind this. And this is what this group of people did. And they basically sat down, designed this design based on pure mathematics and harmonics, laid it down on intersecting lines of the Earth's magnetic field, which happen to cross, they're everywhere, but specifically in this one field in south of England. And they created this man-made design, small design, which is basically a triangle with a hole in the center, or a big circle in the center, with 3 circles on the outside of the triangle. And then they sat down around it, and they just meditated. They just sent out the intent between the 12 of them. They said, we would wish to receive a communication to show us, demonstrate to us that we are dealing with a conscious source. Mm-hmm. Well, a few days went by, nothing happened. A couple of weeks went by, nothing happened. And then suddenly, one day, a pilot was out on his usual daily reconnaissance, and he came across a crop circle, which actually was the triangle with all the circles from the outside put inside the actual design. In other words, the original makers, the people, had left the hole in the center with the circles outside, and the circle.
Back up just a little bit for me, Freddie. What was the intended message of the designed crop circle?
It was simply to communicate to an intelligence, if there was an intelligence out there, that the people down here, the human makers, had made a design based on pure mathematics, which is the language of the universe. It's just like in the film Contact, basically. Pure mathematics, pure geometry. And they created that shape to try and communicate to a conscious source out there, because if the source that was receiving this message was conscious and intelligent, it would do something with the design. And
but I guess what I'm asking is, did the design have a specific message mathematically?
No, not specifically. It was the intent that the people had. That was the specific reason behind it. It was to communicate.
Okay, and so then a pilot spotted one that had taken the circles and placed them inside. Inside,
as if they filled the actual gap. And the interesting thing was that the design that was created by the circle-making force was 100 times exactly the diameter of the original that the people had made. But here's the interesting thing. The original design that was made by this team had used a very unusual form of measurement. They had based it on the ancient system of measurement called the megalithic yard, which was the unit of measure favored by people who built Stonehenge and the pyramids and things like that. Mm-hmm. And this unit of measure is very, very important. And this design that appeared as an answer to the researchers used that unit of measure to exactly 100 times the size of the original. So beyond doubt, there was beyond coincidental doubt that this was a reply to their intent.
Wow, that is impressive, certainly. All right, back to Barbara Kessel for a moment. You said that a man had created a machine that actually achieved levitation, and you are protecting this man's identity. Surely, Freddie, you've got to pursue this, and if that's real, that would break the whole thing just wide open. So, where do we go with this?
At the time that I was writing the book, I had talked to this gentleman, and he was, quite happy for me to, use his information. By the time we got to the editing stage and down to the galley proofs of the book, I contacted him again just to make sure that everything was okay, that I wasn't breaking any confidence. And something had happened in that meantime. He got very, very spooked. And I've spoken to people, throughout my research, and I know when some kind of heat's been put on them. And he basically just wanted to go very quiet, very underground. And it's almost like the story that you hear of people who design carburetors for cars that run on 100 gallons, 100 miles per gallon. They disappear, and they suddenly get very frightened. And that's when he asked me not to mention his name or anything. I just alluded to his work in my book, just to let people know that it's out there and it's being worked on, because I think that he's feeling the heat from somewhere, and I'm just being true to my word that I will not reveal the source. But what I can say is that there is published information from another source which is also working on very similar principles. And this is the work of David Percy and David Myers. David Percy actually co-wrote Dark Moon, which is about the supposed faked Apollo moon landings.
Yes.
And also an incredible book called Two-Thirds. It's really a mind-blowing book. It's not for the faint-hearted. And in there, they actually note all the technical information that they have reconstructed from the crop circles, which also has enabled them to technically create blueprints which enable for the construction of spinning disk technology, which allows for anti-gravitational devices.
All right, Freddie, let me again stop you very quickly. There was a man I interviewed several years ago, Freddie. He was an airline pilot. I don't know whether I told you the story previously or not, but by profession he was an airline pilot, fascinated with crop circles, and he did not give up his career as an airline pilot. But what he had done, Freddie, is he had taken crop circles and made several cutout designs of these crop circles, and then used an old phonograph. The old style spinning photograph, and had begun to spin the crop circles. And what he had started to discern from that was that there was when they were spinning, there was a three-dimensional aspect to the crop circles that nobody had ever seen before. Have you heard about this?
Absolutely, and I think he was starting to get onto something, and inevitably he also validated more of Isabel Kingston's channelings, because what the watchers were saying was that what we're looking at, these pretty shapes, we're looking at the two-dimensional slice of an orange. We're looking at an energy form which has three-dimensional and possibly four-dimensional capability. And we've proved that since with magnetometer surveys that show that the energy of the circles goes under the ground, and also the pilots are having problems above the ground. So what we're looking at is just a two-dimensional shape. And I think his name was Doug Ruby, if I'm not mistaken.
That is exactly right.
Yes, and he began to actually look at this. I don't know if he was actually aware of this channeled information, but he started the ball rolling. And then with the work of David Myers and Percy, they actually took it to the mathematical level, where they extracted the information and actually have made the blueprints. And as far as I'm aware, they're looking for funding at the moment to actually build this machine, which will have anti-gravitational properties, again, just as the watchers had mentioned.
All right, but would that be from the same Barbary Castle design?
This would be a series of other designs which could be superimposed one on top of the other, and that's how they were able to discern how that was done. So it seems as if there's different designs of crop circles bearing different types of technical data.
Boy, this is beginning to sound more and more like the movie Contact all the time, isn't it?
Oh, tell me, when I first saw that movie in the cinema, I mean, I nearly cried, because I was watching the life of myself and many of my fellow researchers unfolding in front of me. It was so uncannily close to reality, and also close encounters as well. That obsession with wanting to know the coincidences between people from different parts of the world that come together to share a same vision. These things are very uncannily similar.
Where is most of the work? Where does most of the work need to be done? Is most of it mathematical? In other words, do we need a team of mathematicians working on this, or who?
Different types of people are being brought into the awareness because the symbols, again, just like hieroglyphs, they mean different things to different people depending on your point of view, and all of them will be absolutely correct. So there's one symbol in my book that people say, well, that looks just like the hieroglyph for divine vibration. And I said, it's absolutely right, but you know what? If you're a biologist, it looks like the centrosome of a human cell, and both will be exactly right. So the symbols are waking people up from different parts of life. And I know that people are quietly beavering away in their houses, working away quietly. People from NASA have emailed me demanding more information, and they'll say, on no account, return this email back to NASA, because, NASA apparently is taking a huge interest in the circles, but they will never make this public. So there are people within that organization who are taking on their own little projects at home. And again, it's the fear that, if they get found out that this is breaking some kind of national security or whatever, they'll get found out, and then the heat will be put on them. I mean, you know how it works. So I know that there are people quietly beavering away at all of this, and all will be revealed in its due time, I think.
All right, so you know for a fact that NASA has their fingers into the crop circle community and is figuring out or trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get as much information as they can. Do you really have proof of that, Freddie?
No, but only from this email from this technician that works there, that he was telling me that there is a lot of interest within that organization. That they actually take it quite seriously. They're keeping a good eye on it. And the way I can validate that is the same way that happened in Britain in the the late 1980s and early 1990s, when the British government was instrumental in debunking the subject. But in the meantime, the military was still keeping it under observation. So clearly people within the system are intrigued as to what's going on. But of course they won't admit it, because to admit that is to admit that we are dealing with a supernatural phenomenon. And of course they can't do that.
You referred to the Watchers as a group that could send a message in the manner that we've received them with crop circles, but not actually affect anything, correct?
Pretty much so, because the reason why they called themselves the Watchers, which I thought was very interesting, was that the fact that they can't directly intervene. It almost sounds like Gene Roddenberry's Prime Directive in Star Trek, which is actually very close to reality, because Gene himself used to attend seances with a trance medium, and if you look at the transcripts and then look at the next generation of the series, you'll find a lot of universal law buried in there. And the Watchers were saying the same thing, that they do not have permission to actually directly involve themselves in our affairs. They're just feeding us the information, and they hope that we, by our sense of will choose to act on this information and use it for the development and the betterment of our society.
I take it that you're familiar with the work going on at Princeton.
A little bit, yes.
A little bit. They are, of course, doing work in the mass consciousness field, and I'm just stabbing in the dark here, but I wonder if there's any mathematical correlation to some of the mass consciousness data that they receive and the data contained in a crop circle. This would be a job for a mathematical genius, but I wonder.
That's an interesting observation. I hadn't actually put the two together, but what I do know is that the Watchers were saying that the information contained in the symbols also is there to awaken humanity at a spiritual level, because the geometric codes that are encoded within the visual design, but you literally have to sit there and draw this information out of it, does actually correlate to the same geometric structures which are inherent in the human body and its chemical makeup. So it's as if the geometry itself is part of the message. It's part of our coding. And that coding is also speaking to us at a subconscious level that helps us to remember who we are and our function here, which is, presumably why they also use the same type of spiritual technology, as I call it, encoded in places like Stonehenge and the pyramids and the Gothic cathedrals, why the Templars died, in their thousands to, keep this information alive, and why, Dan Brown and Da Vinci Code starts bringing this information back up again. It seems to be part of a fundamental archetypal message, an archetypal language, which is hardwired into every living human being.
Freddie, is it true? Is it true, Freddie? I'm sorry, that the Russians actually discovered that the sacred geometric shapes you're talking about have a concordant effect on people's awareness, even the rate of healing, for example?
Oh, absolutely. When the Berlin Wall came down, we had access, of course, to all the files that they had kept at the KGB in Moscow, and some great books were written about this and how the Russians, because they were so cash-strapped, they decided to look at all this ancient esoteric wisdom to find out if there was something true about the way that shape had a concordant effect on the human body and its state of awareness. Because if it was true, they could just build hospitals and buildings that would have an effect on people. And
that's right.
The Bulgarians especially went gang-ho on this idea, and they began to put people who were sick into rooms that were shaped like pentagrams, and they were amazed that people's rate of healing went up dramatically. They then went a stage further, and they built rooms shaped like trapezoids, and they put schizophrenic patients inside them, and they found that shape had an incredible effect on their rate of healing. And they even discovered that when you put blood in a spherical shape, the rate of coagulation of the blood also goes up dramatically. So they basically validated the truth behind these ancient sacred sites, which are built on exactly the same principles of this geometry.
Did they do double-blind studies to prove this? I mean, when you say prove, that's a big word. So Did they actually do double-blind studies that were able to prove this rate of healing, that sort of thing? I mean, that's amazing.
Yes, I believe they did. Yes. I'm trying to figure out my source. It was a book. All this information was praised in the book called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, a very famous book by Sheila Ostrander. I think it was written back in '72. And I believe, yes, that it did do blind experiments, because that's one way of validating the scientific process to begin with.
All right, Freddie, hold tight. We're at the bottom of the hour here. Fascinating stuff. The subject is crop circles. My guest is Freddie Silva. His book, Secrets in the Fields, The Science and Mysticism of Crop Circles. I'm Art Bell. It is indeed, and my guest is Freddie Silva. What a program. We're talking about crop circles, and much of it in a way that we've never talked about them before, the communication going on, why it's going on, what this is all about. Most crop circles actually form between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, apparently. That would be local time, I guess, wherever they're formed, and there's probably a reason to why they form at about that time. In a moment, we will ask. Once again, Freddie Silva. And Freddie, is it true that most crop circles do appear between 2 and 3 in the morning local time at whatever the geographic location of their appearance?
It appears to be the case, just based on eyewitness reports and just the general accounts that we've had over the years. And it intrigued me. I facetiously at the time I was saying that they appear at that time because they like to keep things kind of quiet, and most people, rational people, should be locked away at home in their beds at that time, doing nothing but sleeping instead of being out in the fields watching them happen. And then I came across the most incredible piece of information from the Imperial College of Medicine in London, where they had actually documented on record that 95% of all recorded deaths in hospitals from around the world always happen between 2 and 3 in the morning. And it got me wondering that is there something to do with this particular window of opportunity where it allows a window of opportunity where the soul is able to leave the body, go back to its source, but it also creates a window where information can come to the earth. And, of course, at 2 and 3 in the morning local time is the point on the earth which is furthest away from the sun, which means that the magnetic field of the area also happens to be having a little snooze on its own. So It's as if the planet's defenses are sort of slightly letting their guard down, and it's allowing information to come in the shape of of crop circles. And of course, we know that the crop circles themselves also have a deviation of the local magnetic field, and they also always appear on the crossing points of the Earth's magnetic lines of energy. So there seems to be a correlation definitely taking place between that.
Fascinating. Also, the speed with which crop circles form. Now, over the years, interviewing Linda Moulton Howe and others, we've learned that there have been, for example, people who have filmed the formation of crop circle associated with balls of moving light. So what do we know about how quickly these are formed?
Well, back in the early 80s, when none of this information was ever made public, the database showed that there are at least 80 eyewitnesses from all around the world, from Britain, from British Columbia, Japan. All of this stuff was never published, never made public, and all the eyewitness accounts always seem to corroborate one another, that no matter what size these things were, they always seemed to be created within about 15 seconds. And then the most wondrous thing happened one year in 1988 when a surveillance team of researchers and camera people from all around the world gathered on top of this hill in southern England, and they did a stakeout over a field which over the years had been proved very prolific in circle making. So they camped themselves out for 2 weeks, and this is the site of the infamous hoax that was perpetrated by the British military, because on the second night, when all the researchers went to bed early, the military went out, made a crop circle in the middle of the dark, and in the morning, there it was. And it was a very rough series of circles and very crooked lines, but it convinced the press that the whole thing was a big prank, because at the center of each of these rough circles was a horoscope board game and some wooden crosses pointing the finger at occultists and people like that. So everybody went home convinced that the whole thing was a great big joke, except for a Japanese camera crew who had gone all the way to England, and they thought, well, we're here, we might as well stick around and see what else pops up. And they were rewarded when on the last day of the 2-week stakeout, they caught on night vision camera, right at the very edge of the limit of their equipment, a swirl motion manifesting in the crop, which lasted less than 15 seconds, and it completely validated all the eyewitness accounts. And you may wonder, what happened to this famous tape? I mean, it should have been front-page news around the world. Well, the story goes that the Japanese TV crew were under contract with the BBC that should they capture anything on tape, the tapes would be given to the BBC under license. Well, would you believe that the British Broadcasting Corporation lost the tapes? It would be akin to someone losing the tapes of the Kennedy assassination. I mean, you just don't lose something.
Or say
like
an Apollo mission, for example, or maybe the records of Roswell, or akin to something like that. Huh?
Isn't it interesting? I know it's very funny. I mean, I've worked in broadcasting for many, many years, and I can tell you that just doesn't happen. I mean, once in a while, maybe, but it just never happens. But
well, on the very rare occasions when it does happen, Freddie, it seems to happen to records of things just like this.
Exactly. It's all very, very strange.
Do you know offhand which lettered agencies, Freddie, are taking the aside from NASA, are taking the most interest in this phenomena?
It's always hard to say. If you're dealing with people who try to keep things secret, then obviously the information coming from out of them is always hearsay, or sometimes someone has a contact somewhere within an organization that might spill the beans. But the best information that we had in Britain in the late 80s came from people who were actually researching the subject night and day, who themselves had contacts within the British government. And one man in particular, George Wingfield, and this is already published information, so I'm not betraying any confidence. He had contacts within the British military who had actually said that they had worked with within the Northern Ireland conflict. And for many years, the British government had orchestrated this fictitious press agency that kept feeding information, not exactly truthful information about the Northern Ireland conflict, and supplied it to the media. Well, it turns out that when he investigated the source of the report from which came Doug and Dave, the two famous 60-year-old guys who said that they made every crop circle in the world, sometimes even as five in one evening across different countries. Amazing.
By the way, what are Doug and Dave up to these days? Have there been follow-up interviews, and what are they saying now?
Well, one of them should know better because he's dead. He's probably being spanked very heavily by God at this very moment for having gone out and telling porkies. The other one has gone very quiet, although I did catch a retraction from him in the British press, buried somewhere on page 28 on the 28th of December, 1998, which is a great time to find out great retractions of information, because no one's paying any attention to the media in between Christmas and the New Year. And the headline stated in this one column, I was guided by an unknown force, claims crop circle hoaxer. So it seems that even the world's most famous guy who claims to have made all these crop circles himself was guided by an unknown force, which, going back to the George Wingfield story, apparently came from this fictitious press agency that was originally set up to provide bogus information about the Northern Ireland conflict. So MI5 is a good acronym to bear in mind. It's the British Secret Service, in other words. But in the meantime, when they finally came up with Doug and Dave's story to the media, they were still keeping tabs on what was going on. People's phones were being tapped and so forth.
Jim in Virginia Beach, Virginia asks, does Freddie consider any of the crop circles made in the UK this summer to be authentic? His website, last updated in early August, says he believes most up until that time were fake, ? But they seem to be so complicated and beyond human capability to manufacture.
I hate to be the bringer of bad news, but so far there's nothing this year that I've seen that looks anything closely resembling a real crop circle from England. The real ones seem to be here in America and also in Australia and in Hungary, and they're simple designs. What's happening is, and this is not to say that the phenomenon's gone away, it's just that some years it goes up in numbers, some years it goes down, because the force that's working with it also has to work with natural principles, and sometimes the natural elements are there to work with, and some years they're not. It's like a tide, it goes in and out, just like in nature. But this year what we're seeing a lot of is farmers who are actually taking the money from groups to make designs in their field. Now, when you have the farmer's permission to make something on their land, first of all, you're going to have a lot of time on your hands because you are immune from prosecution. Now, that's a pretty good way to start. Two, I'm watching a lot of the more complex designs being made in fields which are well away from any public areas, which means, again, they can work within the cover of daytime. And I know that a couple of the so-called Mayan design ones, I have actual pictorial evidence to suggest that the people who made them first started off up in the Midlands, in the north of England, and then it came down to the Silbury area. And when they tried to do it in an area which was much more policed by people, they were actually caught making it.
I was just about to ask about that, Freddie, because one of the things that had always been said about crop circles was, in all this time, with all these crop circles, if 80 or 85% of them are fake, nobody's ever been caught. But you're telling me quite to the contrary. There have been some caught. Is that so?
Yes, they are being caught much more regularly than is being mentioned. I mean, I mentioned this on my website as an antidote to the other websites that are out there. And even when I lived in England, I was right in the heart of the whole mystery. So, I was catching them myself as well. Other researchers have caught them as well. But it never seems to make the headlines. Over the last few years, because the hoaxes are getting much more cunning and cocky, they're also getting a bit overconfident, and they are taking a lot longer to create these intricate designs, and they are being caught in the middle of it. 2 years ago, and again, I showed this on my website, there was one design in the Vale of Pusey where we get a lot of these designs. It shows the design in progress over several nights, and even shows the actual construction lines in place, where the following evening they come over and fill a few more. And I've even spoken to people, even at my lectures, that have come up to me and said, we actually caught these people making these designs one evening, and we got their names, and the names actually correlate to some of the known hoaxes that we know are out there already. So yes, they are out there, and they are being caught making them. So it's quite ironic that just as they're getting more complex, as the human ones are getting more complex, the phenomenon itself is getting simpler and simpler. It's a strange irony. So, but I suspect that next year we're going to see some another level of complexity in the genuine ones as well.
Why do you suspect that?
Because it goes up and down. Historically, when I look at all the information that we've culled from the last 2 decades, it seems to follow a natural wave, just like you find in nature. It goes up and down and up and down, and I think we're into that sort of down cycle. And another reason behind this is that the real crop circles also rely on water. They require water as a prerequisite for making the circles, and we had a major drought in Britain this year. So back in February, I was saying we are not going to see any crop circles this year because there's no water there. They need it to counterbalance the heating effect of the energy that they're working with. And this is also historically proved throughout the history of the phenomenon. Whenever we've had a drought in England, the crop circles retreat as well. And thirdly, because there's so much information still to be deciphered from the amount of information that they've given us, simply giving us even more information is just adding to the plate that we already have, that is already overflowing, and we simply do not have the people, the means, or the money to keep investigating more circles that keep popping up. We need to go back to what's already been culled from the information that's already been gathered, and go back to what was happening in the 80s and the 90s, because there's so much information there. So there's just 3 reasons as to why it's a little bit on the ebb at the moment, but they are beautiful to look at anyway, despite the vandalism to the crops. But then again, as I always point out to people, a Gothic cathedral and Stonehenge are also man-made, and they also have exactly the same technology that goes into the crop circles. So appreciate them for what they are and enjoy them.
How in the world? I mean, it is the eternal question. Some of these very large ones that just seem absolutely impossible for humans to have done in the dark of night. You know, they are so very precise. I mean, a lot of people want to know, Freddie, how in the world how's it done?
Well,
not Doug and Dave style, to be sure.
The Doug and Dave style. I mean, some of the complex ones are also genuine. There's both camps are at work here. Let's put this into context. There's still very much a genuine phenomenon going on. I mean, a hoax by theory is a forgery, so a forgery has to borrow from an original. But the more complex ones, what's happening is that there are groups, very large groups of people, up to 12 people in one case, who are involved in coordinating this thing from many points. So when you have 12 people working in tandem, and some of these groups have been doing this for 5, 8 years, so they're not exactly new to this. They're really quite practiced. You can get a lot of work done in a relatively short space of time. And as I say, when you've paid the farmer off and you're working in a piece of land which is well away from public scrutiny, you often take a day or two to do this thing properly. And from the air, some of these look very, very beautiful, but the evidence on the ground gives the game away, and that is the amount of damage that they've caused because of all the flattening, the mechanical flattening, the lack of electromagnetic frequencies, the anomalies are missing. And most tellingly of all, when you lift up the crop, you can see all the tracer lines on the ground that they've actually used to outline the design, and then they come
Well, exactly. I mean, you would have to see boot prints. You'd see, as you point out, tracer lines, all kinds of things that would be done in a mechanical effort. I mean, it should be fairly obvious, and you're saying it is.
I mean, to me it is, but I mean, I've been doing this for over 15 years, so anybody who's got a pretty good eye and also an objective point of view, and I have to admit, it's very difficult sometimes to keep an objective point of view because you're so excited by the whole thing. To someone who does it day in, day out, you can begin to tell the difference, and the other difference is, I'm talking here on an etherical level now, the number of times that you go into genuine crop circles, you also start to suck up the energy like a sponge. And, I mean, I get to the point where I actually start feeling a little bit uncomfortable in the genuine ones now because I've soaked up so much energy in my body over the years that I just feel better just staying outside of them or just going into them for a little bit of time, just making sure that I know what I'm looking at, being satisfied and coming back out again, because all the frequencies which are vibrating in the genuine designs are also vibrating the water molecules in your body. And if you start feeling a little queasy, then it's time to leave as well.
All right. Well, that actually brings up another topic. You yourself, Freddie, said you had a life-changing experience in a crop circle. Can you describe to us what happened to you, where and when, and all the rest of it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a day that I can definitely say I stopped being an atheist and I started believing in God in the biggest sense because it changed my life. And I had no idea that this was going to happen either. And what happened was that by 1997, I began to reach the conclusion that a lot of the stuff that was being created with the crop circles was based on sound. And I wanted to go and validate that. And I wanted also to go to the fields in England to honor that because I felt that there was a communication that was being handed to me subconsciously. Some of this information it was almost as if I was having stuff being spoken in my ear, and I just kept writing the stuff down. So I wanted to go and lie in a crop circle and just give thanks to the source that had been providing this information, because I was feeling very, very guided, but I was still a little bit somewhat sort of skeptical. So one evening, one day I walked into this design in 1997, and I had an immediate recollection of the design. I just knew what it was, even though from the ground level it was very hard to make out. I just felt very much at home. And I said to my friends, I said, I want to come back in here tonight with a little bit of music and just honor the space and just ask about the connection to sound and light and see how these things are made. Well, I went back there about 11 o'clock at night, pitch dark, and I just laid down. I put this little piece of music next to me on this boombox, lay down, and the next thing I remember in the middle of the night was this incredible bright light shining above me. It's the kind of light that beams in your eyes first thing in the morning when the sun is beeping through the shutters in your window, and your eyes start flickering because it's so bright. Well, I have to say at the time that I felt very, very frightened because I suddenly felt that perhaps I was about to be abducted or something, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to open my eyes at this stage. I don't know what's above me. And it was kind of comical and frightening at the same time. But the next thing I remember, something hit me on the back of the shoulder, and it created no pain. It was like a very dull thud with a very large baseball bat. And I remember losing all my trepidation, and I felt light as a feather. And the next thing I remember was watching my hands and my arms float past me, and I thought, that's interesting. And I couldn't feel the ground below me anymore. I was literally levitating. And it was the strangest sensation, but I felt so at peace. And the next thing I remember, and I remember this vividly, there were 3 very, very tall beings either side of me, 2 at the bottom of my feet. One was sort of making interesting gestures with his hands.
Wow.
And it was the most incredible, unconditional love I've ever felt in my entire life.
All right, Freddie, hold that thought. We're going to come back to that after the break. We're at the top of the hour once again. Freddie Silva is my guest. And once again, his book, what an elegant title, Secrets in the Fields, The Science and Mysticism of Crop Circles. From Southeast Asia, I'm Art Bell. One of the most interesting programs easily that we've ever done on crop circles. Freddie Silva is my guest, and if you have questions, and I have no idea how you could be listening for the last several hours and not have questions for Freddie, then grab one of those lines and come on aboard, because we're going to begin taking calls for Freddie in a very few moments. From Manila in the Philippines, I'm Art Bell. Back to it in a moment. All right. Just before we go to the phones, I want Freddie to have an opportunity to finish that story, because he had mentioned that there were beings present. So please, Freddie, do finish that story.
Oh, absolutely. One of the most interesting aspects of my life so far. Yes, I was sort of... I had these sort of very, very tall beings on either side of me, 3 either side of me, and 2 at my feet, and they seemed to be sort of creating these gestures with their hands. There was no spoken communication taking place, but as I said earlier, there was this incredible feeling of unconditional love and support, and it's a feeling which I would love to experience more often in my life. It was just absolutely wonderful, and I wasn't really sure what was going on, except that suddenly I heard this click, and I hit the ground with a thud, and 45 minutes had elapsed in a fraction of that time, because obviously it was a cassette tape that was playing in the background, and the tape had finished, and the mechanism had clicked. So what sort of validated the whole thing in my mind was that I went back to the bed and breakfast where I was staying, where a colleague of mine and also a fellow researcher who, ironically, was also a psychic, and she basically, I met her at breakfast, and she asked me how the evening had gone, and I said, well, I'm trying to put it all into words. I just don't know where to even begin. And she began to spontaneously channel, and they're saying, well, they're telling me that they fed you information about a book you're going to be writing. And I said, what book? I don't want to write a book. I'm doing quite well with my life, thank you very much. I've got better things to do with my life. And sure enough, a year later, I resisted it, and the book came out. I mean, 5 chapters came out in 1 week. I have no idea how that came out. And I can tell you, as a writer for many, many years, that just doesn't happen that fast. But she was able to describe in intimate detail everything that had happened that evening, and I didn't even tell her anything. And that's how it validated it for me. The whole thing really did happen. So it suddenly told me that there is another veil of reality out there, and it's very benevolent, and it's very helpful to us. And in fact, it's much closer to us than we believe. It's here, it's around us every moment of the day, always providing us with help, should we ever ask for it.